Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the launch of Visions of Life 2, an anthology of art-inspired short stories from Crowwoods Publishing. This is the big efforts of Ivy Sandell, who I will introduce right now. Ivy, through Crowwoods Publishing, has published several art books and one novel so far. Uh, we have the great art scene Chicago 2000, Chicago art scene, living artists, visions of life, and A Bloodline of Kings, the novel by Tom Sandell. Ivy, Ivy Sandell was born in Hong Kong, and she came to the States as a teenager. And since then, she has uh, worked on the publishing, and she has a bent for art books. So without further ado, I present you Ivy Sandell.
Thank you, Paco. I want to thank OCWW for sponsoring this book launch, and to Paco and Linda Bayer for pulling this together, and to thank all of you for joining us. In 1997, after my second daughter was born, instead of going back to work, I started my first juried fine art book. I called it The Chicago Art Scene. My goal was to bring awareness of local fine artists outside of the art circle into the general public. I followed that first book with 2 other fine art books. Over the years, I realized that while my books sold quite well in bookstores, in libraries and all that, I never quite feel like I've met my goal of reaching a large portion of the general public. So eventually it occurred to me that if I have short stories inspired by the local fine arts, then I might be able to expand into the literary circle. So this year, I'm really grateful that 2 writers from my first Visions of Life book, as well as a number of writers from OCWW and the Wilmette Writers Group, participated in the writing contest for Visions of Life 2. Fu Tran served as the judge for that contest, and he is the Director of Undergraduate Studies in Creative Writing at the University of Chicago. Quickly, I find that writers are just as intriguing as the local artists, and short stories are really the perfect medium to traverse between the 2 circles, the art circle and the literary circle. The next 2 slides show the people who are going to be speaking. Here we have 10 short stories that cover a variety of life issues from different perspectives. And in this journey we call life, we all have experienced all kinds of joy, disappointments, hopes, and struggles. And reading these stories make us realize that we share so much in life. The 10 authors will be reading passages from their story, and they will be followed by the artist who inspired their story. In cases where the artists are not present, I will be speaking for them, and they are denoted, those artists are denoted by the asterisk on the slide. Before I introduce the next speaker, I want you to know that I'll be posting the link to my website in chat so that you would have access to more details. Our first author is Elizabeth D. Schreiber. She earned her PhD in English from Northwestern University, and now she's retired and she divides her time between writing and volunteer work. She's also a playwright and a published poet. Beth?
Thank you, Ivy. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. At any time, if you can't hear people, please feel free to make a comment in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on it. Or as questions occur to you, we will have a question and answer session at the end. But for right now, in front of you is the painting that inspired my story. This painting, at first I simply saw a cobblestone lane that invoked good memories of a trip to Europe. Then I saw what was threaded through the cobblestones, how war and suffering soaks into the very bones of a place, or the hearts of those who have been through it. Quiet invasions. It is an object, it cannot harm me. She was a scientist, damn it. A no-nonsense scientist who had taken shelter years ago in the sterile confines of rules and laws and evidence. She forced herself to turn around. Why did this painting take her back to that day? There were no gravestones in the picture, no men scrabbling in the dirt as she hid under the linden trees. But something had triggered it, something that memory. I had thought I'd be alone there in the graveyard. It had rained that morning, and few people had ventured out. The trees dripped on my head as I slipped through the empty streets. So empty. I wasn't supposed to be there. At 8 years old, I wasn't supposed to go anywhere alone in this place. Le Vaux, it was called back then, and I was still Magdalena. What had drawn me to the graveyard? The death of my mother, still a deep ache after 6 months. Mama wasn't even buried here. She was back in Metz. Papa had wanted to leave me behind when he got his orders, to send me away to an aunt I barely knew. But I clung to him. I couldn't bear to lose both of them. So he had brought me with him to this town so old and confusing and full of strange people who would not look at me. Frau Meyer next door was supposed to be looking after me, but Frau Meyer fell asleep in the afternoon, and our house smelled like burnt bacon fat and bleach. And she was not my mother. I followed the path from the road and wove between the trees, approaching the rows of gray lumps with their dull green moss crawling all over them. Here and there were flowers wilting on graves, but mostly it was wild, unmown grass, so different from the neat, orderly cemetery where my mother was buried. One of the gray lumps moved. I gasped. A man, 2 men, behind one of the stones, moving up and down, up and down. What were they doing? Stealing? Maybe they were caretakers, clearing away the tangled clumps, now that it had finally rained. I shrank back. They hadn't seen me yet. I could still slip away. Instead, I gripped the little cross I wore around my neck and waited, a stone statue under the trees. One of the men lifted something. It looked like 2 rolling pins stuck together, but larger. They spread the 2 cylinders apart. Oh, they were scrolls. One of the men pulled out a knife, a hand clamped around my mouth, smelling of damp earth and something worse. It jerked me backwards against a bony chest. Spying, little girl? We don't like spies. And now I would like to introduce you to the work of Jacqueline Moses. She's an artist and a lecturer who has exhibited in Italy, Slovenia, and throughout the US. She has also been the artist in residence at many of our national parks. She couldn't join us tonight, so Ivy will show you some of her works. Ivy?
Thank you, Beth. Jackie was pleased that Beth selected her painting as inspiration for her writing. The story closely represents what she has in mind when she was painting Throes of Progress, Quiet Invasions. When Jackie went to Europe in 1995, remnants of World War II was still visible all over Europe, and she felt that Beth's story ties in very well with the constant reminders of the past conflicts. In Jackie's recent paintings, she wants to portray every place as she has viewed them and reflect on changes that she thinks might occur in the future. El Paso, for example, will soon have robotic security guards added to the total disregard for human life along the borders. So with increased globalization, technology, advances, and environmental issues, she feels that many people would have to make very hard life choices. The next slide, she went to Spain and she saw that people were trying to isolate themselves, putting their houses on islands and so forth. And so this is even before the coronavirus. In Portugal, which is the next slide, Portugal countryside, she also saw self-imposed alienation. So she feels that there is a common theme there. Well, next, I want you to meet Linda Bayer. Linda has a BA in English literature and a PhD in psychology from the U of Illinois and at Chicago. She taught at Roosevelt University, the University of Notre Dame, and Governor State University. Dr. Bayer has published articles about her research into metacognition and problem solving, and she has written technical manuals for a statistical software company. After her retirement, she became a member of OCWW. Linda, it's your turn.
Thank you. Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. I picked Garlic by James Ostlund because it made me laugh, because my husband regularly comes into the kitchen and says, "That smells great, what are you cooking?" And my common response is, "I'm not actually cooking yet, I'm just sauteing the garlic in the olive oil." And so this just spoke to me. Let's jump into the middle of the story. "Dinner's ready. Come to the table," Susan called from the kitchen. When her guests were seated, she put the asparagus on the table and poured herself a glass of wine. "Everyone have a drink?" She looked around the table, raising her glass. "Let's toast Walt, my husband, and the birthday boy. Happy 90th, my dear." The guests raised their glasses. "Cheers, all the best. Happy birthday." When silence fell, Susan eyed Walt from across the table. "Speaking of wills, we're all old friends here. No need for secrets. Why were you talking about including Chris in your will earlier?" Walt closed his eyes for a moment. "I said we'd talk later. I wouldn't have chosen now, however. We can discuss it calmly this way." Paula turned toward Walt and raised her brows. "Are you sure?" Walt shrugged, grimacing slightly, and turned back to Susan. Susan repeated, "Why are you leaving anything to Chris?" Knowing glances were exchanged around the table. Walt answered, "Because back when I was getting divorced and Paula was a married undergraduate, we had an affair and Chris was the result. I want to put my affairs in order, and I'm much closer to Chris than I am to his older siblings." "Chris is yours?" Susan interrupted. "I don't have the children I so desperately wanted, and Chris is your child? You lousy son of a bitch." Susan looked around the table. She turned to their lawyer. "How long have you known?" He looked at Walt and shrugged. "Since before Chris was born. When they were divorcing, Walt asked my advice about acknowledging the baby. I recommended that he not do so because it would give his wife the upper hand. I also recommended Paula stay married long enough to make her now ex the child's father, the legal father." Susan's face crumpled. "I wanted a baby so badly, and you knew his child was growing up right next door?" Susan turned to Walt's oldest friend. "Did you know Chris was Walt's?" She nodded yes and smiled ruefully. "It was never my secret to tell. Susan, I'm really glad this is finally out. We all know. Until Paula started graduate school, the only person it was a secret from, people it was a secret from were Walt's wife and Paula's husband." "You all knew and no one told me?" "Well, you and Paula started graduate school at the same time. Walt didn't want people thinking Paula was getting special treatment. As far as people in the psychology department knew, Chris was Paula's ex's. At the time, you were just another student. Susan turned to Walt. Why didn't you tell me when we started dating? I dated other students before and none of the relationships lasted. I didn't think there was any reason to tell you. Besides, by then, Paula and I were completely over. Susan turned to Paula. I used to think you were my best friend, but Chris is Walt's and you never said a word? You knew how much I wanted children. You told me to wait, to be patient. He'd change his mind. I waited so long, it's not even possible anymore. And you had what I wanted all along? Susan started jerkily forking meat and potatoes onto the dinner plates and handing them around. She continued, did you all have some meeting? Decide I didn't need to know? Paula put her glass down. What Walt and I had was a long time ago. Chris was 10 when I started graduate school. By the time we got to know each other, you were already in love with Walt. It was water under the bridge. We decided not to tell you, that it would only hurt you. It's been really tough to keep this secret. We're together so much. I thought it was best. I'm really sorry you're upset. Susan looked around the table, her fair skin darkened to a blotchy burgundy. You all decided? Hard for you? She stood. You all need to leave. You too, Walt. Get out. I always put off what I wanted because you were old and we should do what you wanted now and I could do what I wanted later. Well, you're 90 and my later is now. It's my turn. And if you want to know where it goes from there, you're going to have to get the book. And now I would like to introduce our next author, Ann Kammerer. Ann her award-winning fiction has appeared in literary journals across the Midwest and in regional magazines. She's been a writer and an editor for her entire career. And now here's Ann to read from her short story, Print Services.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you, Ivy, for including me in this collection of short stories. As a whole, my stories kind of look at everyday people and their unexamined circumstances that kind of hold them back from leading full lives. And Jean's story had been percolating for a while, and when I saw Michelle Mitchell's painting moving toward the light, I knew that I had found kind of the inspiration to put it on paper. And to me, the man in the painting was like Jean. He was strong but vulnerable and kind of seeking a different life. And Jean, the character in the story, he never quite knows how to get toward that light because of his alcoholism and his toxic masculinity. But by the end of the story, I think he's starting to climb toward redemption, but I left it ambiguous, not knowing if he'd hit rock bottom yet. In this passage, we're kind of dropping in midway after he's lost his sales job in print services. He's lost his girlfriend and he's about to get evicted from his home. And we find him applying for another job as a live-in landscaper at a roadside hotel. The Bideaway was 2 miles away at the bottom of a viaduct and had once been a popular spot for honeymooners. Jean had driven past a million times but had never seen the repurposed resort obscured by a strip mall. A wooden sign with faded letters hung from a crooked pole and directed him to turn onto a gravel road. Passing under a rusted arch, Jean saw the ring of 3 cabins on a parking lot littered with red pine needles. 50 feet away, a neon office sign blinked in the window of a tiny house with metal trim and a flat tar paper roof. Jean parked near the dumpster in a spot with fresh tire tracks. The Buick shuddered when he turned it off and belched white smoke out of the exhaust. Smoothing back his hair with spit, he inched up in the seat to snap his leather jacket. He muffled the car door open and swung out one leg, then the next, slipping on loose gravel when he stood. As he walked past the roadrunner whirligig, a rough voice commanded him to come in before he even knocked on the screen door. Eugene, a thin man with a sunken face, sat at an army green desk. He butted a cigarette in an overflowing bakelite ashtray and motioned for Jean to sit down. Right on time, he said. Like to see that. Jean settled into a metal chair with a torn vinyl seat. He clasped his hands between his knees. Yes, Jean Witter, he said. I'm here about the job. The man blew his nose and shoved a ragged handkerchief into his breast pocket. He cleared his nostrils again by inhaling twice. Floyd, he said. Floyd Floyd Martin. Floyd leaned back in the wooden tilt chair and triangled his arms behind his head. His eyelashes were crusty and his left eye stuck together at the corner. When Floyd didn't speak, Jean looked at the sticky notes and faded picture tacked to the walls. A portrait of a balding man with a stretched, painful face was illuminated by a silver Benzie light. Jean noticed the man in the print wasn't wearing a shirt and that his collarbone formed wing-like arcs at the top of his muscular chest. My wife took that picture of the painting at some art show, Floyd said. She had it blown up into a big-ass print and put it here for some reason. Maybe she's trying to tell me something. Jean laughed but didn't mean to. When Floyd cleared his throat and raised his eyebrows, he tried to think of what to say. Women, Jean said, they're tough to figure out. Floyd lit a Lucky Strike and offered Jean a smoke. You got that, Floyd said. Sounds like you've got some experience. Jean inhaled and his cigarette crackled. Yeah, he said, I've been around. Work-wise, I mean. I can do just about anything. Floyd's eyes reflected the orange glow of the ember. He tapped a long ash onto the floor. I tell you what, Floyd said, I like a guy who's lived a little, someone with lines on their face who can handle a stiff drink. I don't want no more of these young bucks who are just flat out stupid and soft. Jean crossed his legs so his toe was pointed in Floyd's direction. I've sure done that, he said, lived a little. Jean paused and flexed his arm muscle. And I ain't soft, see? Floyd blew smoke from the side of his mouth. He tapped a pencil. Okay then, he said, you look like we understand each other, like we see eye to eye. Floyd had 2 fingers to his eyes and pointed them back at Jean. Yes, Jean said, I think we do. Now I'd like to introduce our next author. Barbara Joyce grew up attending Catholic schools. She holds 2 master's degrees, one in religious studies and one in writing. She's taught English at New Trier High School in Winnetka for 17 years. She's going to read from her story, Age of Reason, inspired by Eric Semmelroth.
Thank you so much, Anne. I was raised a Catholic and am always looking for more contemporary interpretations of spirituality. And when I saw Eric Semmelroth's Muslim Madonna, it really spoke to me and inspired me with its contemporary message, but also something deeply traditional too. So this is a story called The Age of Reason, and it's about a 7-year-old girl who is soon to get her first communion. Every lesson that fall reflects their focus on religion. They work on their cursive by writing out prayers and sing hymns during music class. They practice walking in slow, straight lines to perfect their procession pace. When Sister passes out lined paper and asks Laura's class to write a paragraph on what they want to be when they grow up, the boys give a range of answers, from firefighter to doctor to president. But all the girls except one write that they want to be nuns. Only buck-toothed Debbie Snyder writes that she wants to be a mother. Laura considers a mother's work, wearing a bathrobe while squeezing oranges and burning toast for breakfast and pushing rump roasts and potatoes into the stove for dinner. On a hot, sticky night the previous summer, Laura entered the kitchen just in time to hear her mother shriek, "I've had it," while slamming the cutting board against the counter, causing the meat to leap and its juices to splash. Her mother flew out the back screen door, leaving her father and siblings speechless. No one wanted dinner. They all went in separate directions. Laura wandered the house wondering where had her mother gone, until she thought, church. She slipped out the back door and hustled 4 blocks to the heavy doors. There, with the summer evening light streaming through the stained glass windows, knelt a lone woman in a sleeveless blouse and Bermuda shorts. Laura tiptoed up the aisle and whispered, "Mommy." Her mother's pained eyes flickered. She smiled and put her arm around Laura, moving over for them to kneel together. A few minutes later, Laura's tall father showed up, stooped in apology, but her mother ignored him. Then her sister, then one of her brothers. But her mother did not move over for anyone else, and the others knelt in separate pews. After many minutes, as they'd all figured out her refuge, they went home. Laura never found out what triggered her mother's outburst. Maybe her dad had made a snarky comment about cooking a roast on a hot night in a hot kitchen. It's Sister Marcia's life that captures Laura's imagination as she stares at the straight lines of the nuns' long robes and wonders about her real body underneath, hidden. Laura envisions Sister's life in the convent, ordered by prayer and song and simple interiors. Laura, too, wants to be a bride of Christ, though years later she thinks how odd the term really, not wife, but bride, this lifetime identity of virgin spouse. By the time Laura would grow old enough to make any sort of commitment to the religious life, she'd become far too attached to the earthly pleasures of wearing bikinis and eating brie cheese and experiencing the taste of a boy's tongue in her mouth to wish to renounce the earthly for the spiritual. Our next story is by James Flanagan, who has been doing technical business writing for many years as part of his career in sales and marketing, but he's recently been trying his hand at short stories. His story, Elvis Has Left the Building, will appeal to all of us who have dreamed of a career in the performing arts, but his story carries a strong dose of reality as well as a large dose of entertainment. James.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to Ivy for including work by such a neophyte writer as mine in your fine collection. Thank you very much. My name is James Flanagan, and my story is called Elvis Has Left the Building, inspired by the artistic work of Eric Semmelroth, titled Imitation a la King. Eric's wonderful artistic interpretation of an Elvis impersonator caught my eye due to the subtle sneer on the face of the subject. I wondered whether the sneer was due to the subject trying to imitate Presley's trademark sneer or dissatisfaction in being an Elvis impersonator. I chose the latter idea and crafted a story around a disillusioned Elvis impersonator in Las Vegas. That character is named Levi, and he confides his career concerns with his buddy Frank. This passage from the story explains Levi's situation. Frank was already sipping his Bloody Mary when Levi walked in. Levi slid into the booth across from Frank. "Thanks for coming out early to meet me," said Levi. "I looked in the mirror this morning and I knew I couldn't work today. Maybe never again. I think I'm done." Levi caught the waitress's eye several tables away, pointed to Frank's drink and mouthed, "One of these, please." "But you got yourself a great job," Frank protested. "You work when you want, where you want." "Come on, Frank. I'm a busker on Fremont Street. I dress like Elvis Presley, sing a little, play a little guitar, and try to get people to pose for pictures with me for $5. That's not exactly a great gig, at least not like I once had." At this point, the story continues by detailing some of Levi's past career successes. Then we learn more about Levi's current concerns in this passage. As he continued to be Elvis, it wasn't the gaining weight that posed a problem, since Elvis carried extra weight in the latter stages of his career. It was the graying, receding hair and the lines on his face, exacerbated by the Vegas sun. Elvis had passed away at 42, with all his hair intact and no wrinkles on his face, thanks to bloating from his overuse of prescription drugs. Levi was in his mid-50s when he got his last club booking as Elvis. From there, he had done some nursing home gigs as Elvis, but those eventually dried up once he made the circuit a few times. The nursing homes just didn't want to book an Elvis who looked like he might be moving in soon. Levi looks to Frank for help in finding a way out of Elvis impersonation. He has an idea in this passage that requires Frank's help to get him into Frank's line of work as hired muscle for disreputable businesses. Hey, Frank, maybe I can do some work like you do. I don't know, Levi. Someone who looks like Elvis before he died, or maybe a few days after he died, might not do well in my line of work. I gotta be tough sometimes. You had the 3 Faces of Elvis show. I got the 5 fingers of Frank. Frank extended the substantial fingers of his right hand before closing them into a large, meaty fist. Levi and Frank continue through the rest of the story to explore Levi's options. My hope is that readers can relate to Levi as he grapples with what road to take in life and career. We all make decisions like Levi makes, looking back fondly on good choices while rueing our bad decisions and fearing the unknown of future choices. I hope this story speaks to you and fills you with hope for your future. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the artist of both Imitation a la King and Muslim Madonna, Eric Semmelroth. Eric is someone who has walked many career paths as an artist, illustrator, cartoonist, designer, graphic artist, and educator. He is currently working as a graphic designer. His work has been featured in several books. I was quite interested to hear that his inspiration for the Elvis piece was an actual person who owned a record store not far from where I lived and worked. So without further ado, here's Eric to enlighten you further. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I want to thank both Barbara and James for selecting my work to write about. And as an artist, you make something and you send it out into the world and you hope it connects with somebody. Reading the stories written around my portraits make me feel like I've really connected. So, so thank you very much. So these 2 portraits, can we go back to Muslim Madonna? Yeah, okay. So these are uncommissioned portraits, first of all, and both these portraits sort of represent 2 strands of what I've been doing. The subjects appear in costume or some sort of chosen manner of dress, and the images are meant to oscillate between their individual character and some, assumed persona. So they're really about identity in the end. Another aspect of the work, Barbara picked up on this, is the interest in religious subjects. And at last count, I've done 9 portraits having something to do with religion. So I'll just mention those briefly. There was the preacher who was a Methodist minister, and he had a collar on. A former Hare Krishna. There was a portrait called Halloween Jesus, and I was at a Halloween party at University of Chicago, and there was a student dressed like Jesus, and I thought, wow, this guy's literally imitating Christ. I mean, that's pretty interesting. So I did his portrait. A Carmelite priest who had a big brown hood on. He looked like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I did one called Buddha's Daughter, and she claimed to be one of only 3 female lamas in the world. So she had her shaved head and her saffron robes, and that one came out real nice. But anyway, there are a few more, but Muslim Madonna. This one came out of 9/11, and I wanted to somehow fuse the Christian world and the Muslim world in a non-violent way after what we'd all seen on television. So this was my response to that. And then can we go to Elvis? Next, yeah, great. So this, that's more the costume strand, obviously. And, sometimes I make a phone call, make arrangements to see these people, and I know nothing about what they look like before I show up. I just got wind of this Elvis impersonator out in West Dundee, and I showed up with my camera, and I thought, this is fantastic. He looks nothing like Elvis. I mean, so there's this disconnect between the individual character and then what he's trying to represent. So I thought that was even better than if he'd resembled him more closely. Let's go to the next slide. So here is their Uncle Ronnie, and this portrait was almost done by accident. And what I mean by that is I had scheduled someone else to come over and be photographed, but he brought along his Uncle Ronnie, who I found much more interesting. And he's an intellectually disabled man, and I just found him really compelling, so I did his portrait. And when I was finished with it months later, I gave him a photocopy of the finished portrait, and I heard he was just smiling and just rapt and looked at that thing for a solid hour or so. So that made me feel good about that. Can we go to the next one? So Blue Boy, I was just thinking about Thomas Gainborough's Blue Boy, and it gave me an excuse to work monochromatically. And then the next one, and that's a gouache on paper, and that just an old friend of mine. So there we go. Let me introduce the next writer. Colby Vargas is a teacher by day and an aspiring author by night. His short stories have most recently appeared in Crux Literary Magazine, Parhelion Literary Magazine, and the Louisville Review. Take it away, Colby.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks to, I want to echo what everyone else is saying. Thanks to Ivy for putting this collection together and including me in it. I really appreciate it. So when there was, when I got a chance to look at the images provided, this one caught me right away. I think like all of us, I have I have memories of amusement parks. Of course, there's a lot of joy there, but there also is a certain level of terror, I think, for me and a lot of people in amusement parks. Many of the rides are designed to scare us. It can be a scary place for a younger child. You can see parents sometimes descending down a certain spiral of being overwhelmed and the way they behave. So and maybe this is just the way I look when I write. I can sometimes see something sort of melancholy behind the surface of a lot of amusement parks. So I was working on some character sketches, and this painting really inspired me to get going and talk about something that had a narrative to it. So the story, A Pact So We Can Fly, is told from three viewpoints. One of them is a worker at the amusement park. One of them is the father who has brought his daughter and her friends that day. And then the third viewpoint is one of that daughter's friends. And the viewpoints are all different views on an event that's going to take place there at the park. So I'm going to start you near the beginning. This is Dean. He's a attendant on one of the rides at the park, and I'll just give you a little look into the story. By 4 o'clock, without a doubt, the best time to be at Happy America, the blanket of wet heat peels back and the air thins as if a powerful valve hidden behind the gift shops and concession stands has been loosened. The sun falls behind the loops of the Whizzer and the spire of Princess Miracle's tower and projects complicated shadows over town square and the promenade. The faces of the early bird moms, who camped out in the black moat of the parking lot as early as 7 a.m., hang at ease. Lines on the big ticket rides begin to shrink. After 2 or 3 times through, Dean begins to think of the patrons as All-American Freckle Earmuffs, or Sullen Gut Slouch, or Caramel Cutie Short Shorts. He keeps the names to himself, avoiding crossing this line, mentioned at least twice at opening day orientation. No one goes to the amusement park to strike up a conversation with the guy in the bright blue polo shirt that somehow already has a ketchup stain sprouting in the shape of a tree just below the park logo. 3 very athletic girls are wandering the park today. Taut is a word that comes to mind, but Dean isn't sure he's using it right. Maybe it is only for inanimate objects. They are accompanied by a big and gangly boy. They are pretty, and they remind him of the girls at his school who were always reporting him for things he had never actually said. They flip their hair and rake through it with their hands, and their clothes are stretched to the limit at the chest and hips, but they don't act like most of the junior high kids who come to Happy America to be seen. These 4 cling to each other tightly. Waiting in line, they turn inward and speak in hot whispers. Today we will be famous, one of the girls says. She has a nose that takes a sudden turn down. She wears heavy stripes of dark eyeliner, and her tank top shoves her breasts up, creating a dark crease of cleavage. The other girls follow everything Sharpnose says carefully, wait their turns to speak. All 3 have the thick, smooth legs of cheerleaders. One of them isn't sure she belongs. She is quiet but alert, scanning the gift booths and the carnival games as if there might be something interesting to look at. The quartet zigzags up the line toward Dean's station, and he picks up more and more of their conversation. Sharpnose and Big Softy reassure the other 2 now and then. This big moment will be worth it, they insist. They are in this together, is the theme they keep coming back to. Then Big Softy leans in like the quarterback of their huddle and mumble whispers the rest. By the time they reach the platform where Dean straps riders in, all of them, even Sharpnose, are sizzling with nervous energy. The air around their huddle hisses and crackles. The quiet escapee has gone pale, and it's not clear if she'll make it to the ride before she barfs or passes out. Something isn't right about the way Big Softy grasps her arm. Not territorial or possessive like a boyfriend, just too hard, like he thinks he needs to steer her. There's a protocol for this where Dean will call guest relations and they will send security, but there's no way they will make it before the ride takes off. If Dean stops them, and this would most certainly count as off script, there will be a scene. Afterwards, he'll have to attend a meeting, what the managers call a sit down. They get up to their car, and even quiet escapee is smiling some, but the smile flows slightly on her face, like it might fall off if she moves too quickly. The more Dean watches her, and he is becoming aware that he has been watching her more than is considered appropriate, the more she looks like a girl in his freshman year art class, who he just now remembers was named Laura. The last thing from Sharpnose's mouth is something about a pact. Thanks for listening. I want to introduce our next author, and you've already met her. This is Elizabeth DeSchrijver, and she's going to share another piece with you.
Hi again, everybody. And thanks for sticking around. In case you're having to keep track of the time, I'm about the halfway mark. So, but the story behind this story, when I was looking through the 80 or so pictures we were given to choose from, I was struck by 3 that seemed to have women appearing or disappearing in them, all by different artists. So I decided to build a story around that, around loss and transformation of identity, rooted in an article I'd read in the Smithsonian, 15 plus years ago, that's always stayed with me, about the BRCA gene mutations found in women of Hispanic origin, even though the mutation usually only appears in women of Jewish heritage. So, from Disappearing Act. It feels like a prison. Serafina struggled to take a deep breath in the tight bodice of her wedding gown. She swished its full skirts, watching her 3 mirrored selves mimic her, Hear no evil, see no evil. Well, what do you think marriage is? Her little sister said with a smirk. Oh, hush, Trina, her mother said, with the trademark flip of her hand. When you lose those last 5 pounds, Serafina, it will be perfect. Fat chance, Trina said. She only has 3 weeks left. Fat chance, get it? Brat, Serafina said. Who invited you? Trina stuck out her tongue. Times like these, her little sister seemed much younger than 12. You look so beautiful, her mother said, giving her shoulders an affectionate squeeze. Just like a princess. Pedro's a lucky boy. Peter, Mama. He goes by Peter now. To me, he will always be Pedro. Now, do you want to try on the veil with the dress? No, Mama. She had lost the battle of the veil. But at least it was only chapel length, more like a large mantilla, a gift from her grandmother. At 26, playing the Virgin Bride for her family was one more burden she didn't need. But she had to pick her battles. Serafina had to admit, though, she was glad that her mother had talked her into the real wedding dress. She pressed her hands against the front of the ballroom-style skirt, glad that she still wasn't showing. Hopefully the full skirt will hide her pregnancy during the wedding. So much had changed in the past few weeks. First, the pregnancy, unplanned, the result of a night of champagne and abandon as they celebrated Peter's promotion. They had been so careful before then. They wanted children, just not this soon. But no question, she was have this baby. So now, on top of planning the wedding, they were staring into a canyon of decisions with what felt like a thin glass floor between themselves and a life-changing plummet into the unknown. He treated her differently now, ever since she had told him about the baby. He held her differently, as if he were cradling a delicate Ming vase. You better not start treating me like I'm helpless, she had warned him. Of course not, he said soothingly, patronizingly. She'd punched him in the arm. They'd both laughed. But her laughter sounded to her as if it were as thin and transparent as her wedding veil. There was so much she didn't know. And now, I'd like to introduce the first of the artists who inspired this story, Catherine Grossfield. Catherine received her MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago, where she is also taught. She has exhibited nationally and internationally. Catherine? Catherine, are you there?
It helps when they unmute, sorry. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to Ivy also for including my work in this book. I'm thrilled to be included, and thank you, Elizabeth, for choosing my piece, Sparkle. I thought that the story, Disappearing Act, was very interesting. The story about Serafina questioning her changing identity in relation to basically every aspect of her life right now, including her relationship to her body, to her fiance, to all of her family members, to her career, to cultural traditions, and even her ancestry. And I thought it was a very interesting evolution that she had coming to terms with how she sees herself in the world. So I enjoyed it very much. And I find in my work, there's a correlation, I feel. I am a still life painter. I paint oil on panel. I choose still life largely because I like to choose objects that can stand in for things that humans do, experiences that humans have. And my work is largely often about myself in relation to cultural situations, things that we all experience in life. And so the first of the three paintings, examples of more current work that I would like to show you. The first one is part of a series that I began a few months ago as we went into this COVID twilight zone existence that we all are in right now. And the series is about different states of mind. This is a rather large piece for me. A lot of my work is small, but this is about 30 by 40. And it's called Clean Thinking. So that's one state of mind. And then the next slide. The next slide is Sparking Joy. And this piece was inspired by the Konamari philosophy, which is all about only having things that bring you pleasure, spark joy in your life, and eliminating a lot of the unnecessary things that we all seem to have. And I kind of mashed up that idea with the idea of sort of an American consumerism that we all kind of suffer from as well. So that was one painting that I did on that subject. And then the next piece, this one is from a series of paintings that I started the year I turned 50, called Crackle Me. It's all of the series is about different aspects of aging. This one is called General Softening. Has to do with kind of changes physically that we all seem to go through eventually. So that's what that series is about. But it's my pleasure right now to introduce the work of John Rush. And John is, his work is beautiful. He is a Chicago artist who graduated from the Art Center College of Design and has had a long and very successful career in Chicago and living in New York as well. He's an illustrator, painter, and printmaker. And you can see from his work that he has an interest in history and mythology and travel. He has received numerous prestigious awards, and his work is held in many private and institutional collections. And Ivy is going to show a little bit more of John Rush's work.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
John's painting, Study of a Winged Figure, was in my first book, The Chicago Art Scene. I don't know if you can see it. That's my first book. And his painting was done in 1995. Currently, John is working on a series of drawings and paintings based on Homer's Odyssey, the epic story of General Odysseus and his 10-year journey from Troy back home to Greece. This series, he said, is not intended for general, it's intended for general sales and not for book publication. He mentions that because he has illustrated entire books, such as Ivanhoe. This particular series of work is centered on 4 women in the story. The goddess Calypso, which you will see in the next slide, she imprisoned Odysseus on her island and offered him immortality. The next woman, Kyrki, turned his ship's crew into pigs. He didn't give me a slide for that. Kyrki, by the way, is the ancient Greek form of Circe, which may be how some of you know her. The next goddess is Athena, and she frequently came to the aid of Odysseus and helped him on his way home. Lastly, his wife Penelope, who waited 20 years for him to return and resisting the advances of many suitors. What intrigued John about this story is his depiction of this man's relationship with 4 different women. It is difficult for him to express emotional complexities in pictures, but he said it's fun to try. The project has been a challenge in storytelling and visually, since he is trying to experiment with both simplifying and abstracting the human figure at the same time. Another artist in Beth's story is Susan Hall. Susan was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and has lived in Chicago since 1993. She has exhibited her work at galleries in New York City, Chicago, and Portland, Oregon. Susan's work, Gift, is in Beth's story. Susan really likes her story a lot. Her first thought after reading Beth's story was when she wrote about how she's holding a white box, she was immediately thinking, did she render this correctly? Then she realizes that it really doesn't matter. She loves how Beth incorporated in her story and loved the hopeful line, bravely grasping the unknown. She sees her own work as meditative and calming and hopeful. But she realizes that people bring their own history in the viewing of art. So Serafina, seeing it as darker at the first glance, makes sense to her. In her own work, Susan is interested in removing all unnecessary elements in her pieces. She uses a very limited palette, keeping things simple. The lace texture and pattern on the surface of many of the paintings helps to obscure the figure and add mystery. Here you see her work Silence, followed by Threshold. And then her last work here is Savannah. Now I'm going to introduce the next author, Julie Justice. Julie was born and raised in England, and she moved to the Bahamas when she was 10, and then to the United States as a teenager. Aside from her writing, she is an attorney and advocate for civil rights issues in Chicago. Julie?
Thanks so much, Ivy, and thank you for including my work in this wonderful collection. My story is about a mother trying to cope with the aftermath of her 18-year-old son's suicide attempt. How do you process your child's near death? And how do you learn to live again? How do you ever trust? This story was inspired by Sandra Dawson's painting Superman, which you can see on the screen now. And this excerpt is from the middle of my story. Middle days are like this. Caleb, wake up now. Each word accompanied by a hard knuckle rap. Susan reminds herself to be grateful. She has this time with him, this day. Another day she might not have had. She's working on getting him well. His psychologist says it's important to build a routine, to get him on a schedule, even as her own life has lost its structure and focus, even as she is living through some deranged parody of maternity leave, once again surrendered to his care, all else irrelevant, her needs, her friends, her husband, all secondary, tertiary, going, gone. Caleb, she wants to kick the door down. You have to get up now. Middle days, she must remember, are not a given. Caleb, another groan, the leave me alone variety. She is relieved, then furious. Why can't he set his alarm and wake himself up like a normal 18-year-old? She keeps knocking until she hears him moving, feet creaking on the floorboards, until he speaks. Jesus, Mom, I'm awake. His deep, deep man's voice startling her. In the kitchen, she finds a bowl, pancake mix, sets them on the granite counter. She had a job outside the home once, not that long ago. But now this, watching and nodding and prodding and pushing, so he will get up, get out of bed, get to his job as a lifeguard. Is this irony? As the one-time editor for Chicago Parent magazine, she ought to have a working definition. She reaches for her iPhone, Googles and finds irony, noun, irony, the use of words to convey a meaning other than, and especially the opposite of, the literal meaning. Incongruity between the actual result of a sequence of events and the normal or expected result. Footsteps overhead now. Caleb shaking the ceiling as he walks from his bedroom to the bathroom. He's never been light on his feet, and the lithium has added 10 pounds. He's lost his lean athlete's build and caught a bad case of acne, one of the drug's wretched side effects. Bathroom door slams shut, water running. The incongruity of Caleb as a lifeguard. Him keeping watch over so many young lives. Superman ready to rescue the sputtering, drowning child. The ironic middle days. In the beginning, she lost 20 pounds. In the beginning, her hair went white in a prominent streak across her forehead. In the beginning, she cut her inner thigh with an X-Acto knife just once, watched the blood bubble up in a thin row of dots. In the beginning, she told a few good friends what had happened. Good friends said, "I can't imagine how you must feel. I know exactly what you're going through. If there's anything we can do, my sister killed herself. Hey, you look good. Have you lost weight?" Whatever they said was wrong. But a few did the right thing, filled the fridge with containers from Whole Foods, curry chicken salad, couscous, minestrone soup. Foods she was certain she couldn't stomach, but did. Eating fast without tasting whenever she came home for a shower and a change of clothes. And now I'd like to mention Sandra Dawson, whose painting Superman inspired my story. Sandra is a good friend and a remarkable artist. She received her BFA from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She lives in Oak Park, where she produces beautiful art at a rate that is truly awe-inspiring. She's had many solo shows and group exhibits in Chicago and across the country. I'm also thrilled that she allowed me to use her painting, Boy, for the cover of my 2019 novel, Degrees of Difficulty. You can see that on the screen right now. And Ivy is going to show a little more of Sandra's work since she couldn't be here with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Sandra said that she was thrilled that one of her favorite writers and good friend, Julie Justice, wrote this powerful and heartfelt story inspired by her painting of the same name, Superman. The three pieces that you see here are painted during the COVID pandemic. She said that there was no real special significance behind any of the work. She just feels like painting the different subject matters and enjoys working with various mediums. The first piece is called Away. The next piece is called Home. And the last piece is called Wind. Next, we have Paco Aramburu, whom you've already met. Paco was born in Argentina and has been writing in English since the 80s. He has written 2 novels and won first prize in 2 flash fiction contests. Paco? Paco?
I forgot, sorry. Thank you, Ivy, and thank you for including me in this beautiful book. So we have, first, I want to talk about Flora of the Subway. I was inspired by her, a painting by Bruno Surdo. The background characters are painted in the platonic, ideal positions They're not hot-blooded people. They're the ideals of what a person is or could be. While Flora, a fleshed-out woman, leans on a column alone with her ennui and a crowd of others, the only witness to herself. And now let me read a bridge portion of my story, The Predicted End of Will by Paco Aramburu. I admit to counting 5.5 good-looking women between downtown and the Fullerton stop. It's a male thing, I tell myself, yet beauty is not the only thing that attracts me to people. An otherwise normal woman sat in a single seat and read, and she was entranced in the interpretation of a concert, channeling her emotions through her brown eyes as she scanned the pages of an old book with fast, acquisitive jerks. After I stared at her for a long interval, I realized with distaste that what I felt was a form of jealousy, that I craved to be in the rapture of an unraveling story imagined so fetchingly. The jostling of the train prevented me from seeing the title of an obviously fascinating book. I couldn't bring myself to interrupt such a special moment to ask my question. As the L train approached the Western Station, opportunity presented itself when she closed the book with a snap. She stood up. Her eyes, a moment ago so intense, were now retiring. She tottered toward the door. I asked what was she reading. When she turned to me, I noticed tears welling in her eyes. Her mind was obviously somewhere else. That's why I was surprised when she took a piece of paper from the book and shoved it in my hand. The doors opened and she ran towards the platform, beige coating floating after her. As back air sped by the windows of the train, I inspected what she had given me, an old bookmark. It was made of parchment that had acquired its edges with time instead of by any process of manufacturing. Handwritten Gothic calligraphy with faded ink, it read, The Amazing Tales of a Woman Named Mabel Jenks. Below that, timeless book fins. At the bottom, in pencil, corner of Roscoe and Claremont. A week later, while replacing the wallet in my back pocket, my fingers bumped into a forgotten piece of parchment that the mysterious woman had handed me. As I was leaving a restaurant in Roscoe, the spring breeze encouraged me to take the walk. Looking for some sort of bookstore, I was not ready for what I found. Of the 4 buildings at that corner, only one had retail windows. The occupants treated them as walls since they were covered inside with gray construction material that had accumulated a coat of dust. I shaded my eyes to see hanging from a string the cut-out bottom of a shoebox with the words Timeless Bookfins written in black crayon. I knocked on the glass. It shook under my knuckles. A short woman with small reptilian features opened the door and looked me up and down. She let her gaze pose the question as to what I wanted with her. Behind her, I saw rows of dusty books crisscrossed by streams of gray light. I told her I wanted to buy the Tales of Mabel somebody. Her small hands snatched my parchment with surprising speed, and she walked inside. I went in gingerly, walking on shag carpet that desperately held on its greenness. I looked around, I noticed dozens of bookshelves holding row after row of books of similar shape, dimensions, and material. All titles were handwritten in the same faded ink and in the same letter style of my parchment. Running a finger over several brittle spines of the pale beige color of untreated leather, I read The Amazing Tales of A, and each one finished with a different name. I took one out to see what it said about these people that was so fascinating. Just as I was about to unfold the creaky cover, the small woman walked toward me with a petulant shake of her shoulders, snatched the book from my hands, sighed loudly, put it back where it belonged, asked what my name was, and ordered me to wait for her by the front. I walked to an empty glass counter bearing layers of dust over a coat of yellow fingerprints. A minute later, she came back with a book similar to all the others, with my name on it. She dropped it on the counter with a sigh and asked for $500. And now, let me introduce our next author. Marie Thorson writes historically based nonfiction and short fiction. A political scientist by training, she worked for decades in university administration. At present, she's completing a family history of 4 immigrant lines and a book of antique holiday cards from the US and Europe. Soft Music, the narrative we're about to hear from her, is the third of her stories to appear in an anthology. Marie?
Thank you. I have to apologize that I've been unable to get my camera to work this afternoon, so I will be just on voice. I loved this picture when I first saw it. It spoke to me on several levels. I was engaged in a lot of genealogical research, and the picture jumped out as being both a tree and, in my thinking, a family tree, but also a representation of a dendrite, of the neurons in the human brain that form the connections that generate our personalities and allow us to be who we are. In my story, Soft Music, the narrator, who lives in Chicago, goes to visit her elderly mother at an assisted living facility in Los Angeles. The woman, Karen, has a brother who lives nearby. Karen reflects, as she's arriving at the home, that her periodic visits are like a stop-motion film of loss. Karen is surprised to find her mother dressed up and waiting by the front door. Here's the scene that unfolds. Well, I say, you're all dolled up. Evan must have told you I was coming. No. Didn't he call you? No. Behind the counter, a man in a plaid sports jacket covers the mouthpiece of the phone. She often stands there waiting. For my brother? For anyone. Oh. The attendant, whose name tag says Travis, hangs up the phone and pushes a logbook toward me. Don't worry, she's not the only one. Mom grasps a woven leather purse that I remember her bringing back from Italy. One European vacation in all those years of marriage. One purse that nobody was allowed to borrow. She opens it, looks inside, and closes it. I've got a car, I say. Do you want to go for a drive? I don't know. Well, let's go out. We'll see the ocean. How does that sound? I don't know. But you loved the ocean when you moved out here. I did. She looks behind me to where the glass doors open onto a sheltered garden. The street beyond is bright with the midday sun. I give her my arm and we walk slowly past the potted palms, the bird of paradise, and daylilies. A thin bald man is reading the newspaper while 2 women sit quietly on stiff-backed chairs, following us with their eyes. Mom walks straight ahead without greeting them. One of the women, the one with surprisingly red hair, stands as we pass and then sits again. I pat Mom's hand. What a nice garden! How insipid my voice sounds, so loud and laden with forced cheer. I lean closer to her ear and try again. Do you remember the garden you had in Columbus? I know what the answer will be as soon as the words are out of my mouth, so I rush on. You had roses and peonies, and in the shade under the big oak, there were hostas in every shade of green, but you couldn't sit outside all year like you can here. I bet it's great to enjoy the garden year-round. She does not respond. When we arrive at the curb, she stares at the car, an SUV that I thought would be comfortable for her. Is this your car? She asks. It's pretty fancy. I pressed the remote, but to no effect. It's a rental. Why do you rent a car when you already have one? My car is in Chicago. I live in Chicago. I flew here to see you. I held the remote closer to the door. Oh, do I live in Chicago? No, but you used to visit when the kids were small. Finally, the locks pop open. I help Mom into the passenger seat, then crawl into the car from the driver's side, reach across for his seatbelt and click it into place. She opens her purse and looks inside. Did you forget something, Mom? I don't know. The artist here, Izumi Yoshitani, is a Japanese-born printmaker who came to Chicago as a college student. After earning her BA in art from Elmhurst College and an MFA in printmaking from the University of Illinois at Chicago, her careers included both teaching and exhibiting her artwork. To continue the family theme, she's working on a memoir for her grandchildren that include her drawings and stories her children wrote when they were young. So I feel like this comes full circle. Thank you. And thank you, Ivy, for all your hard work in putting the book together and in organizing this book reading, this story reading.
Thank you,
Thank
Marie.
you.
Izumi can't be here, and so she said that she sees a lot of similarities between Karen's mother and her tree. Her tree is old, but still has the vitality to spread its branches in any direction it wants. And Karen's mother, to her, still has good posture and pretty strong physically and healthy. She is not bothered by losing her memory, and like her tree, has a mind of her own. This piece that you're looking at, the next piece, is called I Love My Grandchild This Much. And this is the one she made for her oldest grandson, Evan. The next one is a drawing that she did for Davis, her second grandson. And this is meant to accompany the preface for her book. Izumi was in my second book, which came out, which is called Art Scene Chicago 2000, and it came out the year 2000. After the birth of her second grandson, Izumi decided to take up writing. She wanted to write about Davis's early days, her own childhood in Japan, and other family stories. She took a memoir writing class at the Graham School of the U of Chicago and realized that writing a big memoir is quite daunting. So she's writing short stories instead. She's writing short stories around a theme at a time. And one of her stories, entitled Tuesday Ritual, is about her childhood ritual in Japan, going to her friend's house to watch Fufuki Dochi, which is a program about a flute-playing boy, a swordsman, saving innocent lives. And then later, this is the same friend that she learned English with at a Buddhist temple. Another story titled The Second Deployment is about how her daughter-in-law's second deployment in Afghanistan made her realize that she had to come and look after her two grandsons at the West Point Academy in New York. So now we're kind of caught up with her. Thank you for joining us in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed the feast, both for your eyes and for your mind. You can order Visions of Life 2 from Amazon as well as from the Crowwoods website. If you order from the Crowwoods website, then you'll be receiving a 10% discount through July 5th. Now we'll turn to any questions you have for any of us in chat. Paco?
It was a terrific program, Paco and Ivy. Thank you so much for putting it all together. It's been not only an inspiring, but a very entertaining evening. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Fred.
Ivy, there's a question for you. Melissa would like to know how you got your idea for these projects. How did you start thinking about art and stories together?
I started the art books a long time ago when my second daughter was born. Originally, I thought I would have like an art gallery of some sort, but my husband, Tom, convinced me that that's kind of a jump into a field that I have no idea what I'm doing. So he thought that I could start art books. And I have some experience in printing and all that. So I started with that. And it turns out that, gee, I thought I helped some of the artists get into galleries, not specifically help, but having the book on hand sometimes help artists get the recognition that they deserve. And I've heard of quite a few artists saying that it was helpful to them for their career. And so then I did a second one and a third one. Each time it goes to a bookstore, and I had thought that it would go out to the general public. I sold a lot of books, almost 3,000 of the first book, but still I feel like it really didn't go anywhere. It just sits in somebody's coffee table, or worse yet, somewhere in the basement. So I just feel like it didn't quite do what I thought it would do. And that's why I had the idea that if I combine it with short stories, it would go a whole lot further, because we have a lot more readers than art connoisseurs. So that's how I got this idea.
There's another question in the chat, also for Ivy. What was your process for determining which stories to include in your book?
In my first book, I only had 5 stories, and it was more you're in or you're out. The story was great and you're in, or it doesn't have a good ending, or there's something wrong with it that takes too much work, and then it was out. Then, because I'm introduced to the writers group, I'm realizing that, gosh, they can make it better. And these people are willing to make it better so that it would be included. So I no longer have this in or out idea. I had this idea that everybody could be in as long as they're willing to work on it. So that's how come I had 10 great authors in this one.
But you did in fact have Vu Tran read through the stories and provide a winnowing process, because you had winners in each of different categories, and it allowed you to get a different perspective on the stories, correct?
Yes. He judged the contest, and from his reviews, I had him write reviews for the back of my book. And from the reviews, I know which ones are good and good to go, basically. And everything else I felt like needs a little bit more work. So I basically worked on everything that was submitted. And there were some that never made it, but a lot did. So that's how come I ended up with what I have.
Are you working on something now? What's next for you?
I have this idea that I would bring this from a book form to a film.
To a what?
Short movie, short video. So that the next step for me is to try to move that along into the filmmaking world.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
It's just a thought that each area is kind of limited. And the more you expand in your venue, the more people would see it and appreciate it. Whereas if you only show it in one, a lot of times most people don't even know that it exists. So it's pretty hard to get that recognition. So hopefully now I have not just all the artists, now I have all the writers, and then next thing I would have all the filmmakers. And then together, I think we can bring recognition to everybody involved in the project.
We have another question in the chat for the writers. Were you motivated by the possibility of being in the book, or were these stories that you were working on? I can start off by saying my stories were wholly initiated by looking at the artwork because I found out from Ivy about the contest. And I wrote them, right then. But probably not true of everybody, but given they were inspired by art, I imagine that a lot of people here wrote them specifically for the competition. Anyone want to comment?
I will. I was working on a very different version of the story than the one that you heard. I wrote a fest trip for my husband for his 90th birthday that was originally a sketch of people at a dinner party telling him how he had impacted their lives. And Ivy needed conflict.
I can just chime in and say that I wrote my story specifically for Eric's picture of the Elvis impersonator. It was 100% due to Eric.
Thank you, James. You're awesome.
Ivy, what kind of writing do you do yourself?
Well, I don't really write.
At all, I see.
At all.
Do you make art?
Not that either.
Oh.
Ivy's a connector. She's
I think so.
putting things together.
I think if I spend a whole lot of time doing art or writing, I wouldn't be doing this.
Does Tom collaborate with you on any of your works?
I published his Bloodline of Kings way back when. It's one of the novels I published. You can see it, I keep it in the family. It's just my books and Tom's book.
I just want to say thank you to Ivy and thank you to everybody. I mean, this has been really great.
I agree. Thank you so much. It's a fascinating concept, and I think it's a real treasure to have this all come together like you made it happen. And I think it's really interesting. That's fun. Thank you.
Thank
you. Well, today is really all because of Paco and Linda. Without them, I don't think I would have pulled it off.
Linda. Okay.
So thank you.
No, okay. Ivy, thank you so much. It was a great idea.
Yeah.
We look forward to issue number 3.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Okay. Thank you, guys.